Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazell, and this is Dev Dive. And I am joined by Jeffrey Tomec today to talk about Mouthwashing, a horror psychological thriller game that is kind of blowing up right now. And I'm very excited to talk about it because I got a chance to play it at PAX West and enjoyed it from the very beginning. We'll definitely talk about that. But Jeffrey, I'm very glad you're here. You're from Rog, Oregon. Tell me a little bit about yourself before we get started.
I'm at Wrong Organ, the studio behind Mouthwashing. I'm our gameplay programming guy, but I've had a hand in a lot of elements of development for this thing. So should be able to talk about a lot of funny things about development. That's it's an indie studio, so everybody's wearing a lot of hats.
This is the last question I wrote down on my list of questions, but I might as well get it out here. What roles did you fill while working on this game, and how is your studio sort of structured? Because one interesting thing I noticed when I was finishing the game and watching the credits, I did my due diligence as an interviewer, is that Wrong Organ is just credited as Wrong Organ, and there are 8 names, and there are no specific roles. And I don't think I've ever seen that necessarily in a game. So tell me a little about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, in how we structured the credits, honestly, we thought it would be pretentious to list all these specific because so many people are doing so many different things that it's when you have a credits list where it's gameplay team and then you have 3 names, or then narrative team and it's 3 names or something, and every role is 3 names. It kind of just starts to it's the same things repeating. It feels very yeah, I guess pretentious. So we had this original team for How Fish is Made, which is our previous game. And that's kind of the baseline for how we do a lot of our dev. So for that game, it was split very cleanly between a narrative and art person who did kind of all the concepting and kind of direction for the game. Then we had an audio guy who was doing all the audio. And then we had me just kind of filling the gaps on making it an actual video game around those things. And then Mouthwashing we've pulled on. We have a producer now and people on the technical back end a little more, and a real artist who does dedicated art stuff. We're in total on dev, we're 7 people.
Yeah, I noticed 8 names in the credits, but small team, very, very compact, and I think that comes across in the experience of the game, which is just this sort of laser-focused, screwing with your head kind of game that I really enjoyed, because I'm big into horror, I'm big into things that are kind of creepy and odd and weird, and the surreality of this game, I think, is my biggest takeaway from it. So at PAX West, I went to a party where press and the devs could more directly interact without having all the crowds and throngs of people. And Mouthwashing was the first game that I went over and tried, and because it just had such an interesting logo, an interesting name, and an interesting aesthetic. When I played it, I was being told sort of the background narrative by the person who was demoing it, and I was immediately sold on it. And I'm very excited to have played through this game and to be talking to you about it because this is one of my favorite games I tried at PAX. And so, for you and the team on the dev side, what is it like making demos and making small versions of your game and sending it out to these events for people to get their eyes on?
So demoing Mouthwashing was interesting. In an ideal world, working on a video game, you normally will have something full, and then you're trying to find a way, how do we cut a part out of this? I think realistically in dev that your PAX demo or whatever is just what you have
Exactly.
at the time of the demo. In our case, we were working on Mouthwashing for quite a while, and development was kind of stagnating in certain ways. And it was there was a lot of questions about how it would really play off to people, and a pretty broad scope of story to do stuff for. And then when the demo came up for Steam Next Fest, which is what we were building it for, that was kind of when we had to really hone everything together into a playable experience or something that really felt compelling. And actually, for that, then we ended up adding a bunch of scenes that did not exist before the months of lead up into actually showing that off for the Next Fest. And then once we made that, we've just been riding it into all the conferences and stuff. But it's weird demoing a game like Mouthwashing at cons because it's 20-minute immersive demo for a game or whatever. It's you can't really cycle very many people out. Everyone's sitting down for the whole thing. And then also it's just the worst context to try and get immersed in when you're sitting in a booth and there's a line of people behind you or whatever. We were actually pretty surprised with how much people do enjoy it at those things because we kind of thought it would be a disaster the first few times.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little bit of development history there, and I'm just curious, what's the timeline of Mouthwashing like? When did the idea sort of spin up? How long have you guys been working on this? What's that like?
Mouthwashing started dev, I think it's between like a year and a half and 2 years ago. It was an interesting situation because we all came from the same school where in Sweden we go to this like game design trade school called Future Games. And so we made How Fishes Made WoW there. Then we graduated, and pretty much this whole like class of designers, there's a section of us in that decide we're going to do our own company. And then Mousewashing is really our first idea. We had another project in the middle between How Fish Made a Mousewashing when we were still in school that kind of fell through. But so Mousewashing was really just sitting down like back to our roots, a narrative, horror game, kind of just How Fish is Made but better in a lot of ways. So we've been working on that since, and there were some other projects and we demoed some other stuff in the middle. So like the development was very scattered. Turns out there's some growing pains and starting like a whole ass company
Yeah, of
and
course.
stuff, like moving from student to professional. Yeah, I think things really got spinning, especially around the time the demo came on and we brought some new people onto the team. And then from there, it was like a 6 months, like really hammer the rest of the game out dev cycle.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense. And again, I mentioned earlier the surreality of this game, which again is my biggest takeaway of it. And I'm curious for you going into this designing process and coming up with something that is messing with your head, non-linearly structured, lots of scenes and sequences where things are coming out of the walls and changing around you. Do you have any particular moments of development of those surreal moments that really stick with you? A favorite moment, one that was interesting to implement from a design level, anything like that?
I think we had a lot of fun with almost all of them in their own ways because they're all so different from each other in how they're structured. So initially, Mousewashing had one thing that was called the Bizarro sequence, is what we called it internally. And this was like the giant end of the game. Jimmy's just cut Curly's leg off, things are go crazy mode. That's when we're really going to cram a lot of the horror in. That's been there since the first ideas for Mousewashing. But it was initially just the Bizarro sequence. There was only one sequence that really went that deep into it. Later in dev is when we decided, actually for the demo is really when we were like, yeah, but this might be kind of boring. Like, we don't want to backload all of our kind of horror stuff onto the end. We ended up making a bunch of these sequences, but yeah, every one of them's pretty much individually authored. And specifically, like, my favorite stuff is probably that's our Swansea fight, probably for me,
Oh,
is
sure.
my favorite one. I think that was a really fun like switch up, and there's like a long history of like horror games that decide to add like one shooting segment right at the end that sucks. We are not the first people to try this, but I was hoping we could be the first people to succeed at making it feel like it's actually part of the experience. I think that was a lot of fun. That, and then anything that had to do with the data moshing and all the little glitchy bits. That
Yeah, I
was
was gonna ask
a
about that.
yeah, big thing that I worked on in dev, and I love that stuff, especially the one when you first walk into medical after you see Daisuke get injured, and
Yeah,
it's like the static one that's sitting there in the room. That's probably like my single favorite like visual effect in the whole game. I love that one.
the first moments of fake crashes and simulated glitch effects and things, that I think was one of the first things that keyed me in when I was playing the demo that this was something really unique because it's very rare that you get a game demo on a show floor that crashes in front of you intentionally. I had a couple game demos crash actually at PAX, but when this happened and the world sort of melds and the screen starts to blend a little bit, and then you are able to fade between sequences, that I think was I was like, oh, that's really cool. You don't see that very often. I think one of the only times I've ever seen that happen is the game Fez. Early on in the game, when you get your ability, the game does a crash and it's sort of like blue screens, and then it restarts and you see the dev logo for the first time. And that I was much younger when I played that first time. Like, oh, someone designed this, and like it kind of keyed me into game dev. And so how did you design those glitch effects, those fake crashes and things? And was that something you guys always thought from the beginning would be something that would make this game stand out, or is it something you kind of came to?
Yeah, so that came a bit into dev. Kind of funny enough, this has happened for How Fish is Made, and this has happened for a lot of spots in Mousewashing. In the same way that the demo did a lot to like kind of push the game in the right direction because we actually had to deliver something. It's actually very similar with when we work on trailers. Is that like oftentimes I'll want a shot for a trailer because we care about it making our trailers pretty cool. We'll have a specific idea for a shot, and then to make that shot, I just have to add something to the game. So initially, I think data moshing to cut between the scenes was like we always wanted to smash cut, to be clear. We were always like there has to be some kind of really abrupt cut that moves you between places. But then we were making our like reveal trailer for the game, and I was thinking about ways to transition, and I was like, oh, and I did like an actual data mosh just by corrupting the the video footage. And then I was like, well, this is actually really cool. We should just do this for realsies though, like in the actual video game. And that's mostly where it came from. And then once we had the visual effect, we wanted some way to make it feel right audibly. In like Half-Life 2 or any like Source game, when you enter a loading transition and it starts playing that one like last bit of audio like endlessly, it's just we were like, what if we just did that pretty much, but actually made it happen in game intentionally. It's also a great way of hiding loading screen transitions, because we already like straight freeze the screen, and so we can do anything we want in the background to like set up for the next one.
There's no processing power when everything is just frozen on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. And the actual moshing, like where it starts moving, doesn't even start until you're loaded into the next thing internally.
Gotcha. Yeah. And you mentioned the audio design, and I think that's another great element of this game that contributes to the surreality, to the horror, to the thriller aspect of it. I honestly have no idea how Foley works in game design. What was your Foley process like, or your sound design process, like getting some of these effects? Because there's some crazy shit that happens in this game, and the sounds match it. And
Our sound guy is kind of a wizard with this stuff, and he did a lot of it. Anything that's done like vocally, so like all the like weird pain noises and stuff that you're probably thinking of, those are all just him recorded in a little shack, like screaming into the mic and stuff. It's really about as natural as it gets. But then we use a lot of audio library stuff for other things. Specifically, like the audio we're using is heavily altered from its original sounds. But I think most of Mouthwashing's audio is built of pieces we found from the internet and compiled into something. There's not, when it comes to like a footstep or something, I don't think we pretty much ever record those things ourselves.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about developing a game in the modern day is you have assets that other people have created that you can kind of, freely use online. And one element of this game that does definitely take that in a more obvious way is the section when there is included video clips that are, I assume, copyright free online. There's like cartoons, there's like footage from old like PSAs, there's a silent film that I actually recognized because I'm a film history jerk, and I was like, hey, I've seen that before.
The skeleton?
Yeah,
You recognized the skeleton when you saw that?
absolutely I
That's
did.
hilarious. I didn't know that was like a piece of film history.
When you're my kind of film studies graduate, and you are obsessed with like silent film, there's not that many to watch that are like iconic or widely available. So that passed by my eyes a couple of times. With these like royalty free cartoons and videos and things, how did that come to be in the game? Because I've never seen anything like that included in a game before.
Yeah, that's another one that got like last minute added to the demo. This is kind of a perfect example of how shit comes up for the trailer than for the demo, and these kind of deliverable shape development. So it's like initially we have our first trailer, and we're like, what do we do for our first trailer? Well, we want to show this commercial for the mouthwash at the end of it. That would just be like a cool gimmick for that trailer. But then we're like, damn, this commercial thing we made is pretty cool. What if we put in the actual video game? So then we have the scene already planned where the crew first find the mouthwash on the ship. And we're like, okay, what if we open that chapter by just playing this video? And then we're working on the demo, and we're like, okay, well, now we need to try to add we want to add more sequences that break up all the dialogue. So we're like, we have these two dialogue scenes that need to be separated from each other. One of them's like, I think chapter 2, so it's like the more like explory dialogue one, then the next one's just like a conversation when they find the mouthwash. And we're like, okay, we want to put something in between. We have this commercial that randomly plays. What if we just put the commercial on a TV in game? But then it's like, okay, well, now we should probably have something else to put on the TV. And we thought it could kind of work as as kind of a weird, surreal, kind of scary segment. I don't think this really came across that much in the actual game. I don't think it really needed to, but the initial idea was that you were kind of going to have this feeling that it's like you can always leave the TV at any point during the interaction, so that the player would kind of be like, is there something around here? Like, am I just supposed to, like, that kind of, it's like, it's not like we're railroading you to like watch this thing. It's like you can go around and there might be this feeling that something's going to like come up on you while you're doing it or whatever. Cause it's kind of like when a horror game gives you the run button, and like, it doesn't matter if you actually have to run sometime soon, but now that I can, it means that something could chase me. kind of like a tension upper. Anyway, at the end of the day, people really just sit down and watch all the videos, so I'm kind of sinking a little too deep into it. But that was kind of the concept. And then, so it's like, we get all this stuff, public domain, keep it kind of relating to the main thing. We already had the Swansea monologue planned later in the game that uses a lot of public domain video in the background. And in How Fish is Made, we had this big like musical sequence that people love where we also use that. So it made a lot of sense to kind of try and find more opportunities to do that kind of stuff. And people seem to quite like it. I always feel a little weird because it's like a lot of content we didn't make. There's a lot of stuff we did actually do audio for in that, like the meat one, like the one where they're in the like slaughterhouse. That one's all dubbed by our audio guy and stuff. So there's a bit, but yeah, and that's pretty much how it works.
Well, I think the interesting thing about choosing these clips that very clearly come from an external source and from a source that is well before any of us were born, it does, I think, add to the surreality and also the realism of this world. Because one thing about the clips that you chose to put on that television that I think keeps them feeling coherent with the rest of the game is the game has this overarching theme and narrative of capitalistic gain and commercialism, and everything's for money and everything's kind of got this like happy face on it, even if there's this sinister backside to it. And so talk a little bit about the themes of the game, when you guys were designing this and coming up with this narrative, how that sort of ties into the art design and the posters and everything. I know it's a big question, but the themes of this game I feel like are very focused, and the clips tie into that.
Yeah, I think no. I mean, there's definitely some very kind of core things we want to get across with this project. Some of them are more, I guess, subtle or more story based than others. And like, I'm sworn to secrecy on anything talking about like what the story means or whatever. But in terms of like kind of the core theming, so obviously we have this whole like kind of weird capitalist angle that surrounds everything. Pony Express is very much supposed to be this like really kind of uncaring, like kind of comically not evil, but just like, you know, evil in the way corporations are evil through
Bureaucratic.
like, yeah, exactly. That was like a big thing that was supposed to kind of surround the whole game. All the environments the players in are supposed to be kind of weirdly uncomfortable, whether it's too industrial or even just too kitschy and nice in a lot of ways, or like colorful. Like everything's supposed to be kind of oppressive in the same way. The entire environment and design of pretty much everything is built off that. We have a lot of times where I'll take something like the daytime or sunset screen or whatever, where it's like it's supposed to be there as like a way to keep the workers feeling like they're in like a day-night cycle or whatever, so they just like have some semblance of what it's like to be back on Earth. But obviously we use it as like this super like this constant orange glow that you're constantly covered in the whole game, and it's all just supposed to kind of really just be the worst possible circumstances it could be, but often in a way that results from like just kind of the uncaringness instead of it being like something evil has happened to you, and that's really important. Corporations are less compelling as antagonists when they're evil or they're not working in their own gain. Like it's the idea of just being like a cog in a machine that as totally doesn't even know you exist, and that kind of in itself is terrible. But there's not even like the direct meaning to hurt you. It's just like the way that the wheel kind of rolls.
No, definitely. And that was a great answer. And it touched on three different questions that I
Let's
have on
go.
my list that I want to ask. The first thing that I took away when I was walking around this environment, which is a ship called the Tulpar, which is a freighter ship transporting some sort of mysterious goods at the beginning across space. And our crew of 5 people are trapped on the ship for over a year or something like that. And the Tulpar is a space freighter. And we've seen that in other movies and games and things. But the interesting thing about the Tulpar is it's unlike any other science fiction ship aesthetically that I've ever seen. There's a cockpit, but it's a very tiny cockpit with just screens. You never see the outside of space except for like the opening kind of crawl of basic information. There are no windows, there's no spacesuits, there's like sheer white or bright lights that you usually see in science fiction. And so what was the inspiration behind making a spaceship that kind of it looked like a factory, frankly? I mean, it's like the scary boiler room that Freddy Krueger runs through, but turned into a spaceship. And so that was really bizarre. And talk about the design.
That was actually one of the initial things for like the first pitches of Mouthwashing. So initially, this was more of an actual point in the game, or something and it kind of phased out a little bit over development. But our initial ideas for Mouthwashing, we weren't even sure if we wanted to make it obvious that you're actually in space. We kind of wanted to be like, it was never like critical to the story, but it was almost like I can't remember what. I think there's multiple movies under like the brand of like Cloverfield, but I'm talking about the one in the bunker where they don't know if they're
Yeah, that's
actually
10 Cloverfield Lane.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Kind of like that movie where like we wanted to kind of have this feeling where the player would always be told they're in space, but like there's nothing in the spaceship really objectively points you at sci-fi. Like and the feeling of whether your situation's even real, just kind of that like how vague it is around you is supposed to kind of build to the total atmosphere of the piece. So yeah, it was very intentional. There was never going to be any windows. There's no design of what the Tulpar looks like from outside. All of these things are totally obfuscated from the player, both kind of to create the sense of unease and also to really hone in on kind of our character story inside the ship. Because like Mouthwashing is kind of world building and stuff on that level of is kind of less the point in a lot of ways.
Yeah. You talk about the obfuscation and the fact that, I mean, even on your side, there's not a design of what the Tulpar is like. And that is something that, because I'd never seen the outside, and obviously, as you said, it doesn't exist, that was always something that was in the back of my mind of, this is really weird because the layout of the Tulpar is also bizarre. It is basically a giant circle. And so to me, it almost felt like I was like running around a hamster wheel, or like I was going through like a gerbil tubes that are like connecting to things. It's very tight. It's very oppressive. Talk a little bit about the layout, the map design of this, because it really is just there's no I've never experienced anything like it in a game.
Yeah, so initially the goal was to like you'd always get where you want to go, but it's supposed to be kind of still confusing or feel like it's not laid out like very sensible space. Now initially it was just actually too confusing, and players didn't know where the hell they were going. They had some issues with that. So the making it circular came later, and that was actually the result of we brought someone onto the team who was helping with like level design stuff around a bit before the demo. He went in and like redid our kind of level layout and stuff to make it a little more like accommodating to players. And it ended up in a really good spot where we had a lot of people still have a bit of confusion when they're first navigating the ship. But if you look at it from like just a map, it's like incredibly simple. It's literally just like a circle with a single line going out that goes to the cockpit and utility. And that's pretty much the whole thing. I'm really happy with how that part turned out because it was kind of like it's a space that's like surreal and strange and confusing, but also it's like the simplest place you've ever been when you actually get down to it.
I think also narratively, it combines in an interesting way where you assume there is more to this ship, but because of the expanding foam that has gone off during the crash, and because there are certain doors that are blocked off that you're not allowed to go into. I mean, you're never allowed in the bathroom. You never see the place where they are supposed to sleep. It's outside of the lounge, and so that again I think contributes to the confusion and the feeling out of place, even in the environment that these characters are supposed to exist in for over a year. We never see their private space. They're always either in like a creepy ass hallway or some sort of oppressively colorful the lounge or the medical or the utility or whatever. So that's a very, very unique design decision.
Not showing their personal quarters was partially a scope thing on one level, but like, but it was also deliberate in a lot of ways as well, where we were just like, we really wanted to avoid having any areas of the ship that actually feel like a place you could be comfortable in. Like everything is supposed to be uncomfortable. So we really focused around this kind of core set of environments that are all a little different from each other. Like I think every room has a pretty distinct kind of vibe to it. And then we have kind of the hallways connecting everything, especially for how tight our kind of scope was for it. Like, because we had like, eventually it's like we're making a whole game in like 5 rooms. We had to really make sure that those were like effective in doing what we wanted them to. The feeling of the Tulpar, especially after all the audio and art came in, like later in dev and the foam and all of that stuff, like it's I couldn't be happier with how it turned out because there was a lot of dev working on a game like Mouthwashing that's so based on like atmosphere and story and stuff. When you don't have the story written and the atmosphere and you don't have the audio in and the art still early, when you're in like early to mid dev, man, it kind of sucks. Like the game's just not very interesting. It's kind of shocking how much like just that final level of polish kind of is the video game with Mouthwashing. So we had the whole game for so long, but then it's just like when you actually played it up until pretty late development, we were just like, man, like this is not fun. Like there's nothing here. And then you have the audio in and the narrative, and then it's great. But like Yeah. Anyway, it was it's a bit of an interesting process with these kind of things.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate the tight scope of this game. I'm someone who really appreciates when I can feel every decision in a game and not feel like I'm missing anything. And mouthwashing definitely is that. And you talked about this being a very short development cycle and not trying to reach beyond your scope, even to modeling like bedrooms or things like that. What about the aesthetic of this game? It kind of has this PS1 low poly, low resolution textures aesthetic that I think adds a lot to the surreality and also can be messed with in interesting ways, like we were mentioning earlier, the smear effects and things. How did the team come to that aesthetic? I know Al Fisher's Made also shares that same aesthetic, but is that something you guys have just always really liked? Is that what you're going to continue in the future, or is it for this project it really worked?
Everyone on the team before How Fish Is Made even started was kind of just into this kind of stuff already. I think there's a lot of advantages to this weird low poly PSXy stuff. I'm a really big fan of it, and I think it's definitely the direction our studio's moving in the future. There's a limit to how high the fidelity you really ever want to go is, because there's a lot you can do with the kind of stuff here. But like my kind of philosophy on this graphic style and stuff is that this whole genre comes from fundamentally those old like creepy pastas and stuff about like, oh, what if a PS1 game was haunted or whatever.
Mm.
And like there's kind of a clear like fan excitement right from the start of the idea that there's something that's just scary about old games, especially the farther we advance on graphics, just like the weird warbliness of PS1 games and all of the kind of audio that's just like a little like everything's just like a little too loud and a little too fast, and it's just like everything hits that kind of like uncomfortable zone where it's like the almost human range and stuff like that. It all just kind of works so well. Then you add like the pixelization layer onto everything, and now it's like things in the distance kind of lose this like definition, and there's a lot of like you can just get milk a lot from the environment. It's the same way with like pixel art games, how like within the pixels what you imagine is often more evocative than the actual high fidelity version would have shown. And then also it's just on a scope level, I mean it's wonderful, and not just scope of like you're a small team so you can only work on these kind of games. If we got 100 people right now, I'd rather be able to make 10 times more content than make the content look like twice or three times as good or whatever, because things get exponentially more difficult the more you like make it look pretty, quote unquote. So like I think low fidelity in kind of Mouthwashing's way, maybe like a little higher as we'll go in future, is a really good kind of point you can settle at, where it's like you can still convey anything you want. It all comes with this really nice atmosphere kind of prepackaged into it, and like you can just do whatever the fuck you want. You can make one scene that's set in a totally different environment from every other scene, because it just doesn't take that long to make an environment for something like.
Yeah, totally. It's fascinating that this aesthetic is something that I don't think I'd really seen used in a modern design context. I mean, I can't name probably a dozen of them, but this year I've played three, which is Mouthwashing, Arctic Eggs, and Apartment Story. Three games I really like, and it's interesting to see sort of this crop of devs that are working on their early projects and all sort of coming to this same inspiration that more than likely comes from the games that you played when you were younger, and then the thoughts that you've had you're reading creepypastas and things. And so that's just an interesting confluence, I think.
I will say that this kind of graphic style, I think it's kind of been like a bit more of like a secret trend in like indie spaces. Because there's like, if you talk to the right people in like indie horror, especially, they'll say like, "God, I'm fucking tired of these PS1 looking games, man." There's like I said, there's like the 500s this year or whatever, and there are a lot of them. But there's like they're just starting to kind of finally break through, where people who weren't previously kind of in that little like PSX echo chamber are starting to kind of see things. Like you have some kind of famous old examples like Paratopic. So that's probably like the oldest example. That's when I first discovered it. And then there's been quite a few good ones since then. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff. There's all of like the old David Szymanski games and stuff all kind of fall into this category. So like Iron Lung got pretty big a while ago. That's a great example. These things kind of existed in the background. A couple get big every once in a while, but it seems like this year they've kind of been popping off. Us, Arctic Eggs, Buckshot.
All from Critical Reflex, which is hilarious.
Yeah. Repping the home team here, but yeah, and then there's like Crow Country. There's plenty more that I are on the tip of my tongue here, but I think it's kind of almost like the natural response to this issue in game dev, where like games really kept inflating graphically so much so quickly, and fidelity keeps going up, but like for every fidelity increase, the effort required to make that happen goes up way more than the actual graphics level does. People are getting kind of tired of it. Like, it was pretty trendy for a while, but like, I think we finally hit the point where you can really tell that it's like hurting the quality of games in a lot of ways. Like, it's not to say the games are getting worse, but like, you can definitely tell that like the developers are crushed by the weight of having like these being so much more expensive, so much bigger teams to work with, but scope is like lower in a lot of cases. Like, even for like a great games, like a good example, like the Resident Evil 3 remake. I think it's a good game. They're missing segments from the original Resident Evil 3, right? Like, it's like, and what's the team difference? In terms of how many people, it's probably like, it's definitely more than 10 times
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
people. And it's just because like, if you want to make a game that looks that good and sounds that good and stuff, it's not, proportionally more effort than kind of the budget you have. Like, it's one thing outscales the other a lot. So I think that nowadays, when we've kind of hit this stagnation in a lot of places, a lot of indie devs are almost pulling in the exact opposite direction. And I think it's really exciting to see. I think more kind of like content directed games where like you get to just do whatever the hell you want with the art because it's simple is a really good place to move. I think a lot of indies love trashing the like good graphics games as well. I do think there's some games that like work extremely well with the insane high levels of
Yeah,
fidelity they
you're not
go
going to shit
for.
on Rockstar or Naughty Dog. It's not like they
Yeah,
make bad
exactly.
games.
Like, and I think those games immensely benefit from looking as like realistic as they do. But I think that's a very specific goal that's treated like the default everything standard. And I would like it to be that your graphical solution is based off what game you're making, and that all of these options are kind of should be weighted as equal by developers. I think because a lot of the time, I think it's better to go the more old fashioned route for stuff.
Yeah, and it does seem like there is an audience that is interested in this. Steam is a great marketplace for finding games like this. All of these games that we've mentioned, I played through Steam. There's an audience for it online in terms of videos and reactions and playthroughs and things. And one thing I think is really cool that I'm excited to pick your brain about is that this game. Mouthwashing has been picked up by some really major YouTubers doing playthroughs of it, and so I saw that Jacksepticeye, who's one of the biggest long-standing YouTubers, did a full playthrough of it. And on the team side, what was it like watching your game be played by someone that popular with that many subscribers and then getting millions of views on it? What did you see in terms of sales, in terms of reviews, in terms of like, I don't know, SEO, like the search numbers going up and stuff? Did you watch that video? What's that whole experience like?
So we've watched almost every reasonably sized playthrough of the game, like someone in the team has at least. We've all seen the Jack video. Yeah, in terms of just to open with kind of the metric side of it, because you were asking, so the how the stuff generally works is that like sometimes a very small game will get very lucky by a big content creator picking them up, and it will be like a huge explosion for that game. But more of the time, a million small content creators playing it is often a greater effect than one like huge content creator. And but huge content creators are still like a really good sign because normally for it to reach them, it has to have reached the all the people under them first. So like once we've kind of hit that point, you're doing really good, but you don't see it as like a giant spike in sales or something. It's kind of just like the game is doing well. My sales are doing super well because the game is doing well, and then as a result of the game doing really well, do you notice these huge people start to play it, and it gets in kind of this giant cascading effect. We're finding out whether it's chicken or the egg on a lot of this stuff is pretty difficult. It's the best part of launching stuff is getting to watch people play it, especially when you're going for these kind of more evocative experience kind of games and you have these like specific moments you really want people to react to. It's really, really compelling. I've watched a ton. Jack had a really good video on it. Gab Smolders had like a super great video on it, and many, many others. The reaction to Mouthwashing has been astounding. Like how Fishman already did well. Our lucky break was that one was a Markiplier video. But nowadays there's so much happening about the game. It's kind of hard to keep track of. Like it feels like it's grown beyond us for better or worse now in some ways. But it's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully it's just like inspiring and exciting to be like, man, people are hungry for this. There's an audience. The interest is growing. And I hope that continues to your future works. Jeffrey from Ron, Oregon, one of the creators of Mouthwashing, thank you very much for joining me. I have one final question because before we started recording, you asked if we could curse on this, and I said, yeah, it's fine. I don't care. I don't give a shit. And I noticed I was counting. You cursed one time in this, and so I'm a little bit disappointed, frankly, that you did not curse more in your responses. What is your most used curse word?
That's really hard to say. It's probably fuck. It has
Sure.
to be like there's just it's like the thing with it is not it's not like I go to my way to. I know that it's like so just built into like being someone who just like had a lot of their socialization on like Discord and stuff that like I get very worried anytime someone I'm going into an interview where I can't because like ever since I left like high school, that's just not really been a concern. So going into any kind of interview, I'm just like, I really hope they let me because it's like it's not that I'm going to a lot, but it's that like it always like it's not controllable. It's just like a guarantee.
I know exactly what you mean because I feel that same way in like doing my reviews and things is I always feel when I'm like, okay, if I'm going to share this video or this review with someone and I actually end up cursing, even though I don't realize it, like, what are they going to think of me? Are they going to dislike that? And I remember having a discussion with my friends. We do movie reviews together. There's four of us. We had a sit down conversation like, maybe we shouldn't curse so much. Like this might be hurting us a little bit. And I was on the side of no, just like let it happen. Like let our personalities come out. So you and I are definitely on the same street with that. But anything you want to mention before we say goodbye?
Get mouse washing, play mouse washing, talk about mouse washing, make people consume more mouse washing.
Yeah.
Buy our soundtrack, give us money, please. All the classic stuff.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for joining me. Everyone, thank you very much for watching this. I hope you guys stick around for more dev dives in the future. Bye.